Well, hello! Welcome to Jack Corrigan's Harness Shop. Today, we are going to be making a gunsling just like this one. So let's show you the tools you're going to need to get this project started. You will need some sort of leather. This is a reptile print I have that'll work quite nicely. You'll need an awl to punch the holes for your stitching. You'll need a groove cutter, some compass scribes or dividers, a hole punch of some sort. This is a rotary hole punch, a pricking iron or a diamond chisel, a cutting implement of some sort. This is my handy dandy knife, some thread, preferably waxed, some harness needles, a square, a straight edge of some sort, and a ruler, some barge cement. This is our glue, and for some hardware, some sling swivels, and some Chicago screws, as well as a Conway buckle, but we'll get to that later. So the first step that we're going to do is I'm going to take my first piece of leather, which I've cut to approximately 2 inches in width, and I'm going to square off one end. To do that, I'm going to use my square and mark the ends with my little scribe. This step just makes sure that all my measurements are more true than they would be measuring just from a single point. Here I'm deciding how long I want my rifle sling to be. I decided on a length of 42 inches, and then I added 2 inches on top of that, bringing it up to 44, as those extra 2 inches will add the little bit of length needed for the little top tab with the Chicago screw to fit on the front of the rifle. I have the first piece of leather cut out. Now I have another piece. This one is cut at about 2 3/4 inches, so it's a little bit wider than the first piece. And the reason we cut it wider is so that when I glue the pieces together, I have a lot of overlap, so I don't have to perfectly line up every single thing. Makes the process a bit easier. Here I decided to cut that wider piece of leather the whole length of the ruler. And now the fun part, deciding on the profile of your rifle sling. The way I'm going to do mine is where it has a thicker strap up near the front, and then it'll slowly taper down to the thinner strap where we will eventually attach our Conway buckle. You'll see the Conway buckle in a little bit. Here I'm marking out essentially the widths that I want, as you'll get to mark out the length of the wider pad of the rifle sling that you want, and the length of your small, thin little 1-inch piece for your buckle of some sort, or even just the tail end of the sling. I decided to keep the pad of this rifle sling as wide as the original leather was cut. Slowly taper down to 1 inch, and then that 1 inch will allow the Conway buckle to fit over, and to fit through the sling swivel. Quickly just using some jeweler's rouge and a strop on my knife to make sure you get a nice and sharp cut. You always want to make sure your cuts are nice and sharp, as you don't want to tear any leather, and you want them to be as clean as possible. If you have to take multiple passes, that's fine. Here I'm cutting out the top little 1.5 to 2 inches for the little top loop that's going to go in the front sling swivel of the rifle. Now I'm just measuring down for about how long I want my adjustment piece, as the Conway buckle will allow me to adjust the length of my sling. And here I'm just cutting the little pieces away so I could have 1 inch left over to fit in the sling swivel and to fit in the Conway buckle. As you can see, I now have 2 little pieces still attached. Now I'm just measuring my little angle between some marks I made for my taper down from the pad to the little adjustment sector. Holding the ruler at an angle and using it as a guide, you can see I now have a wider piece near the top, kind of tapers down and then goes to the thinner piece. But you'll be able to see that a lot better once I get the other side done. As you can see with both sides done, there's a wider pad. And just for a finishing touch, I'm going to chamfer the corners of the top pieces and the bottom piece. Now the fun part. Now we're using some cement. Barge cement is an old glue that cobblers used to use to attach soles to shoes, but it works well in most leather applications. So I'm going to apply some to my main profile piece of my sling, coating it quite thoroughly, but you don't want to get it too thick and too viscous. Spreading it thin will help quite a bit. And then you will also apply a layer to the other piece of leather. The way that barge cement works is it likes to stick to itself. So apply a thin layer to both pieces of leather, stick them together, and then I'm just taking a mallet to make sure to get out any bubbles. Now that the glue is set for approximately 20 minutes, I'm going to take my knife out again, making sure it's nice and sharp, and I'm going to cut along the border of the top part of the rifle sling, allowing me to have both sides roughly the same shape. Now that I have all that cut out, I'm going to take my gunsling to a little sanding wheel. This allows me to even up and adjust any pieces along the leather since I glued two pieces together. It'll allow all the high spots and low spots to kind of blend and make it a more even edge. If you don't have access to a sanding wheel, you can always just use a sanding block. Here I'm using the grooving tool, or the groove cutter, and I set it to a width that I like for my stitching, and I'm running it around the outside edge of my leather. I'm only doing this on one side, which will be the top side, so you can see all the lovely stitching. Corners are always fun to do with this tool. And what this tool allows is for when you have your stitching, it'll all kind of sink into that groove more and be more flush with the surface of the leather. Here I'm using my pricking iron or a diamond chisel, and I'm going through that groove now, punching holes most of the way through my leather. The way that these work is you do one set, try and get it as straight as you can, and then you line up the last two holes of your first punch with the next of your chisel, and it should line up all nicely. Do that all the way around, and then you can get ready for stitching. Here I'm cutting my piece of thread and weaving it through the hole of the needle, then taking a piece and sticking the needle through it one way, and then flicking the thread around, making a little S shape, and sticking it through the other way. Doing this and then pulling tight allows the thread to kind of lock around your needle and essentially act as a knot so that your thread will stay in your needle and not come undone. You're going to do this to both sides of your thread, so you have two needles attached to either end of your long piece of thread. It's a bit strange, but that's how saddle stitching works. Taking it over to a saddle horse or a stitching horse, I'm going to line up my piece of leather with the groove facing me so I can see all the diamond chisel holes. I'm going to take my awl and I'm going to pierce the leather and push one needle through from the other side. And then take the other needle and push it through from its side, wrapping my thread around it and pulling tight. This makes a single secure stitch, and then you will repeat this step all the way down the gunsling. Piercing from the right, needling from the left, and then through the right, wrapping the thread around and pull. Since this forms a single locked stitch every single time you make one, you never have to worry about your stitches coming undone, say if you have a loose thread or you lose a thread for any such reason, as each next thread after and before it is locked itself. It also is a quite beautiful stitch, and there are various different colored threads if you want to spice up any of your leatherwork a little bit. There's blues, reds, whites. You can have fun with it. And that's what a small section of threading does look like. And I'm going to spend some time now making sure to get all my stitching done. Once you have all your stitching done, you are good to start punching holes for your Chicago screw and your Conway buckle so you can actually attach it to your rifle. Just making sure that my sling swivels fit on top and doing some rough kind of measurements to see where I want my Chicago screw to exactly sit on the rifle sling. You can tinker around to wherever you want it to fit, but try to have a little bit of leather wrap around so that there's enough meat around the Chicago screw to make sure it doesn't tear through any leather. Just using the compass dividers to mark the center hole, or the center piece of the leather, so I can make sure the hole is nice and centered. And then, looking at the Chicago screw, I'm going to set my rotary hole punch, or if you have other hole punches, pick the one that most matches the size of your Chicago screw. Set it to that setting, find your little mark that you made for your hole, and squeeze. Once that one's done, the way I like to do it is I like to put the Chicago screw on, make sure it fits nice and well, put the sling swivel on, and fold it over. Then you can simply put an awl or something else through the hole to mark exactly where you want it to sit on the gunsling. This ensures that the holes line up nice and straight. And then it removes any of the guesswork. Marked now. Gonna make it a little bit more visible so it's easier for me to see on this leather. Make sure it's nice and centered with the other hole I punched, just to double check. And then take the hole punch again and give it a squeeze. Now you can take your Chicago screw and put it in there and make sure it fastens up nice and tight. And then we can move on to the other end. Moving on to the other end, first I'm going to make sure that my Conway buckle, this is a Conway buckle by the way, it's two loops that have a large spike in the middle. That allows the leather to kind of weave through and then lock itself in place. First, since the width of this piece is 1 inch, just like the other little tab near the top of the gunsling, I can use the same setting on my compass and kind of stroke down the center and mark my first little piece. Now I'm going to set them up for the distance I want between my holes. And I'm going to take the first one and kind of punch it into the leather, making a small mark. And then walking it across the leather, I can make sure that all the holes are evenly spaced, nice and center. And you can add as many holes as you like. Of course, you can always overmark and then not have to punch the holes after. Now I'm just going to take a stitching awl and kind of twist it in those marks to make sure they're more visible to me for when I'm going to be hole punching. As you can see those little marks there, so I'm going to make sure that I set my rotary hole punch to the size of the center spike in the Conway buckle here. That way the leather will fit nice and snug around it. And then I'm going to pick a hole and just start punching. Well, we hope that your gunsling turned out just as well as mine did, and hope to see you on the range. Please remember to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.